Phil Spencer shared all sorts of new details today about Xbox, raising prices, Game Pass, and Keystone, and a whole lot more. Earlier today, or I guess it really depends on when you were watching this, Phil Spencer took the stage at a Wall Street Journal live event where he talked about a wide range of topics. It was an interview, a Q&A session between the journalist and Phil Spencer, although no questions from the audience, unfortunately. And he talked in some really candid conversation, honestly, about the status of Xbox, where it is in the marketplace, Activision, and everything else that's going on. So I've pulled out some bits of information and some audio clips to share here while we roll the B-roll, because there is a lot to dive into here, because Phil, he really didn't hold back. So I pulled out a couple things here. Let's get started with Xbox Game Pass. Phil Spencer said, I think it'll stay in the 10 to 15% overall revenue, meaning overall revenue of the Xbox org, and that it's profitable for us. First off, this just at a high level is big information, knowing that it's 10 to 15% of the Xbox revenue. That's a really big deal. It actually gives us a basis of where Xbox Game Pass sits in the land of revenue for the org. So that gives us just a little bit of information, but more importantly, he says that it's profitable. And that's a really big deal as well, because obviously Microsoft is dumping a bunch of money into it, but there's a lot of different ways you can slice profitability. Now, Microsoft's about to spend, or hoping to spend, $70 billion on Activision. Obviously, if you factor that into Game Pass, it's not profitable. And if you factor in some of the other costs, I'm sure it's not profitable either. But I bet what he means is from the games are in the cloud or stored on a server and people are paying on a monthly basis, and that at a pure, if we didn't invest anything else right now into Game Pass, it would be profitable. I believe that's probably where he's coming from. And it's one way to just present the information. Now, Microsoft did give us additional information yesterday during the earnings, so keep this in mind, that they said PC Game Pass growth year over year was 159%. So this really just kind of paints the picture of the spread of the land, or the lay of the land, if you will, about how Game Pass is broken out just a little bit in revenue. And they also said yesterday, keep in mind too, that 20 million people have now tried cloud gaming for Microsoft. So that's just an interesting little tidbit. But to me, this one, we'll put it number 2 out of number 3, because I think the next one is the most important. But Microsoft has held steadfast on pricing. We've seen Sony raise pricing on their consoles. We've also seen them raise pricing on their games. And so the question was presented to Phil, and here's what he had to say about raising prices. We've held price on our consoles, we've held price on our games, and for us, and on our subscriptions. I don't think we'll be able to do that forever. I do think at some point we'll have to raise prices on certain things. He didn't go into much more detail than that, but he did go on to say that it was important to maintain pricing through the holidays. So don't be looking for a gaming price increase, but let's be real here. Games have kind of stuck at that $60 peg for a long time despite inflation. But then let's also be more honest. Games really aren't $60, because you might buy a game for $60, but then you might buy a cosmetic, you might buy some DLC, you might buy some add-ons. So the pricing of games has been really in flux, but that initial upfront cost has always been around $60. And Phil is very clearly saying that, look, we have considered this. As of right now, we are not going to be raising prices, but I strongly suspect, based on his language, that they are going to be doing this in the near future. But keep in mind, though, that if game prices go up, this only helps the narrative that Game Pass is a better value. So actually, on one hand, it's like, okay, that's kind of bad for the consumer. But on the other hand, as long as Game Pass pricing, which we'll talk about here in a second, doesn't go up, it actually increases that value even further, because for obvious reasons, it takes less games to justify the roughly $15 a month. Now, I strongly believe that if Microsoft is able to close the acquisition of Activision and they toss Call of Duty in there, that price will be going up. I would be shocked if it didn't. Maybe not day one, but maybe when that new Call of Duty drops, things are going to be going up. And I suspect that is what Phil is sort of alluding to here. Is like, look, if we spend $70 billion on a Call of Duty and we're going to put it in Game Pass, available day one, they've got to justify that, and $15 a month doesn't really feel like it's going to cut it, if you know what I mean. So just keep in mind that we have that coming down the pipeline, and that's where I think the pricing might actually be raised. Now, the third interesting item, and I think this is the most interesting, is Keystone. Now, Keystone is that streaming box. Remember a while back, and by a while back I mean a couple weeks, there was that box that everybody found, and this conversation point was brought up. It was like, Phil's like, yeah, I kind of did tweet out that picture, and it shows it, and he's like, hey, it is a prototype prototype. But Tom Warren actually ripped the audio from the event, and I'm going to play it back for you here because I think it's pretty key to the conversation.
Of hardware and cloud. There's a lot of scuttlebutt about the Keystone stream service you're working on. So what's that going to look like? And is that the spell the end of the Xbox console? Is it going to be like the BlackBerry?
So there was a picture that went out, which was Keystone, he said, was the code name of something that we were incubating internally, which was, think of it as a streaming console. So there's no local gameplay, low cost, plug it into a television, and you'd be able to stream to the television the video game, the Xbox games that are available. We instead, back kind of the late spring, pivoted to working with Samsung. We put an app on Samsung TVs that let you play Xbox games, and I still have the prototype. It sits on the shelf behind my computer. So there was a picture that went out of that device, giving people choice, whether they want to play on that tablet, whether they want to play on their smart TV, they want to play on an Xbox, they want to play on a PC. We think that's really critical to where we're going.
So right there, you heard him say it. So they made a pivot. They made a pivot along the way, and that pivot was with Samsung. And that's kind of what a lot of us expected here, is that when Microsoft went to the TV manufacturers and said, hey, please include this product and this hardware or whatever else is needed to enable this, well, we're going to give you a little marketing help too by not shipping our own device. And I tend to agree with what their conclusion was, that shipping that box just wasn't the right direction. And so the other point that Phil kind of brought up later in that conversation is he's like, hey, we're not ruling it out completely. It just doesn't sound like now is the right time. So either they've got a couple ideas about getting just better hardware to get a better experience through that dedicated box, or they're just truly simply waiting a little bit. I suspect they're waiting for things to mature. They're going to let their partners like Samsung, we've seen like Razer with the Kishi, we've seen the Backbone, we've seen all sorts of partners, the Logitech G Cloud, just these things are coming out of all the woodwork. And Microsoft's letting these vendors, it would appear, to be taking the hardware risk while they build out and do what they do best, which is the software side. You can remember that's a very Windows model, like Windows meaning the OS of how Microsoft had done all this stuff. And so these were the three big points that Phil kind of really talked through, but it just really gives some more validity to what's going on with Keystone and why it was delayed, even though I'm sure there were more conversations related to that. Game Pass, functionality and where it is on the overall revenue, and that pricing conversation I think is really key. I suspect we're going to see, not to reiterate it again, but I suspect we're going to see Game Pass pricing increase along with the Activision acquisition. And I can't blame them. I just hope it's not too much. I think $5 a month would be justified. At least that's something I would be palatable and worth paying each month for the Game Pass with that massive catalog of content. So there you go. That's like the nutshell version. You can go read more information from the Wall Street Journal about what Phil said on stage, or you can just keep it subscribed here because the only BS on this channel is me.